NWSL, they just completed their group stages for the Challenge Cup. And we see a lot of players competing in the NWSL. We talked about this last week, which players are doing well, which players we want to see a little bit more from. After this past weekend, OL Reign, Kansas City Current, North Carolina Courage, and Washington Spirit. These are the 4 clubs that are advancing to the Challenge Cup semifinals in the NWSL. But we saw a lot of goals from national team players. Ashley Hatch gets a brace. Kristen Press, we see her score a goal. Alex Morgan, Christy Mewis, Jalen Howe. Lots of players in the NWSL scoring goals. Lori, I'm going to go to you first. You were on the call for games this weekend, on the sidelines, actually, field analyst. So you got a different perspective from Lori Lindsey this weekend. But watching the NWSL competition, what players stood out to you from the national team that you saw play this weekend in the NWSL? We're starting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ones you just mentioned with the 2 goals is Ashley Hatch. It was interesting. That game was a ton of fun, first of all, because we got to see Caroline. Obviously, doesn't play with the U.S. Women's National Team, but does play with the Brazilian national team. Her first start, exciting. Both of these teams, I think, have had a really good start to this Challenge Cup. But I think when we think a lot about this U.S. Women's National Team, you think about young players. You do think about Washington Spirit right now because they do occupy quite a few of them.
A lot of them.
And this was outside of that game, which had some oddness to it a little bit too. I think this was kind of a weird weekend in general. Just we saw some players step up, but we also saw a lot of players out as well. Andy Sullivan being one of those. But in terms of the Washington Spirit, Ashley Hatch, I think, had a really great game. One of the things that the Washington Spirit in general, coming into this game was how can we start off better and get off more on the front foot? And so that does entail Ashley Hatch, Trinity Rodman, Sanchez, a little bit of acquired game, I think, from Sanchez and Trinity Rodman. But I mean, listen, fair enough. It was hot. It was hot. These players, I think those 2 are fun to watch, are performing at the best, and we've seen them score. And then Hatch has had a little bit of quieter games. And this game she happened to step up, and they had a lot of rotation with those with their team as well. And I think still to compete against a North Carolina that has looked really good in the Challenge Cup. I mean, still this Spirit team that's performing high. So I'm going to go with Hatch. Sticks out to me. I'll let Sandra chime in because I could go on forever about other players and I want to hear from Sandra.
I want to hear from Sandra about this, but I've got to ask, did you learn anything different being pitch side, not in a booth, not bird's eye view of this match between Washington Spirit and North Carolina?
I have been on the sidelines because we'll go down there and say hi to everybody when we're live at games and stuff. I'll tell you, this has nothing to do with the actual game, but the athletes are unbelievable. If I played today, I'd be broken in half. It's just not even, it is so fun to watch. And Allie and I were talking about that because we were down there talking with the coaches and, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's so fun to see and be there live and see the players. And it's interesting to see also the experience. This is why, if you're listening to this, get to a game, go live. It's such a different experience than even just watching on television. I mean, it's great that we have all of them streamed or on network, but if you can go live, what an event. And there's the energy around those 2 teams in particular were so fun. And listen, it got somewhat transitional because it was hot and the players, even though there's going to be a box midfield and it was going to be tight in there, listen, that the seas parted and that game opened up. But yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. The athletes are phenomenal. So fun to watch.
I'm in full agreement with you. There's nothing like being able to catch it live. You just, you catch things that you just aren't able to get on a stream or on a broadcast. It's you're operating on specific angles when it comes to the stream. But when you're seeing it live, you get to move your head back and forth, get to see all kinds of things. But if we're sticking with Washington Spirit and North Carolina, I was really, I was really impressed with Trinity Rodman and her defensive work rate.
Oh yeah, good call. That's a good shout. Yep.
I think obviously it's for people love them some goals. They love some home runs. They want to see some dingers. So I know naturally the goal scorers will typically be at the top of the docket, but we love defense on attacking third, and we always try to highlight that where we can. But I just thought that Trinity Rodman just covered lot of distance during this particular game. Maybe it was because it just got open very quickly and was very kind of transitional. But being able to see teams try to isolate or try to limit the attack with the Spirit, because they can come at you from all different types of angles. But watching these two teams go head to head on this final match day and sort of seeing the Spirit try to put this very equal game plan together of, making the attack count when they can, but also limiting North Carolina on some things, kind of putting them in more isolated spaces or more pressure into half spaces and kind of this collective coverage. And then I don't know if I can't really recall a game where I was maybe more impressed with some of the defensive work of Rodman. And I think because a lot of that in her first season, a lot of it was just wanting to see this player and what she was tasked with, which a lot of it was like, go, get in the attack, get on the ball and try to get behind these lines. Right. And we saw a lot of that in her first season last year. But then watching this particular game, it's like there's something about this player. And when it kind of, just to maybe give people like maybe an example, and I hate to do player comparisons, but it gave me like some Sydney Leroux vibes when I was watching Trinity Rodman in this game, because that's another forward who kind of prides themselves on like running at back lines or contributing in defensive coverages. So it just gave me some vibes around that. So I would include Rodman maybe in this category of players, U.S. National team players that we're looking at having strong games, but even though as a forward, just kind of like on the defensive side of things.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent shout as well. And it'll be interesting because when you do think about that team, you do think about the three that we just talked about, Sanchez and Hatch included with Rodman. But like if Trinity's doing that work, then that just alleviates some of the pressure for those two, and then vice versa, right? And so that front three to me is the best in the league right now. And it shows the evolution of Trinity and goodness, the ceiling is still so high for her. It is a bummer that we saw Kelly O'Hara because, I have been critical about Kelly and her play with the national team. Sometimes depending on her positioning and the balls that she's serving in, but there does seem to be like a real understanding for her of like how she can help the Spirit team, of where she can get into the attack and help, continue to keep play. So it's a bummer also to see, I'd say, Kelly go out, because it would be interesting to see her 90 minutes in that game and what that would have looked like for her on the attacking side and how that could have pinned North Carolina in defensively a bit more.
Kelly O'Hara probably would have changed the course of that game, ultimately at ending a 2-2 draw between Washington Spirit and North Carolina. But at the end of Sunday match day, both teams would be finding themselves into the Challenge Cup semifinal, looking at more games in the Challenge Cup before the regular season gets started. Other players that we've talked about before in the national team, midfielders, looking specifically in this general area, Kristie Mewis, who is with Gotham FC, and Jalen Howell, who, Lori, we've talked a lot about Jalen Howell, Andy Sullivan in that defensive midfield 6 role. We saw both of these players get goals this weekend. Neither one goal really making that much of an impact in the game. Kristie Mewis for Gotham scored on a penalty kick at the end of the first half for Gotham against Orlando Pride in the stoppage time of that game. And then Jalen Howell, she gets the opening goal for Racing Louisville against Houston Dash. However, Louisville fall to the Dash 2-1 in that match. But I was happy to see that Kristie Mewis stepping up to take the penalty kick for Gotham. Not a surprise by any means, but stepping up and being able to take that for a player like Kristie Mewis, who personally I want to see more of from her and Gotham. I've talked to both of you about this separately together, that I want to see more from Kristie Mewis in order for her to continue to be an influence for the national team. And then another player in Jalen Howell, the rookie in Racing Louisville, who is trying to break into the national team. It's almost like she's getting into the national team because Vlatko Andonovski needs another defensive midfielder alongside Andy Sullivan to play and contribute in that role. And we see Jalen Howell get her goal with Racing Louisville, a really nice volley strike from her. It was a defensive mishandle from Houston, and it lands to Jalen Howell, and she volleys it. It was a really good goal. That's promising to see. I'm hoping that a goal from Jalen Howell in club play in the Challenge Cup lifts her confidence, and that will translate throughout the NWSL regular season, and hoping that it translates into national team level, and that kind of continues to expand and grow. Other players that we've talked about not getting time with the national team, they need to show more at the club level. Kristen Press, Alex Morgan, both of these players drilling down penalty kicks. Did anything stand out to you if you're head coach Vlatko Andonovski watching Press and Alex Morgan this weekend in the NWSL about kind of bringing them back into camp ahead of the qualifiers?
Yeah, I think after this Challenge Cup, I think with the conversations that we've been told on the media side that the U.S. coaching staff is having with some of the more veteran or experienced players was the importance of, getting back to club play, getting into local markets, and getting into like a regular regimen in terms of, getting back to their fitness levels and getting more into form. I think if we're looking at just these two California expansion sides with LA and with San Diego, with Kristen Press in LA and Morgan in San Diego, I don't know how you look at the Challenge Cup, and especially sort of that middle half to sort of this ending half stage of the group play with Kristen Press and Alex Morgan, and not get them into a camp with some of these other younger players.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little bit difficult to gauge in terms of this final match day, because we're talking about two players that put away goals on penalty kicks, which is a very essential skill when you're getting into large international tournaments where anything can happen and you have to be prepared for anything. But I mean, when we're looking, for example, even with just Angel City, with how that penalty came to life, it's because of Kristen Press doing what she does on the ball and slicing and dicing up back lines. And not only did she earn the PK, she got up and took it and converted it, so there's a lot going on here, I think, for these two players in particular during this Challenge Cup, that there's enough there for me to get them back into the mix of these national team camps. But I'm not Vlatko Andonovski. I'm not sending those emails or making those phone calls, but I really want to see these two players. If they are showing that they are healthy and competing, they got to get back in the mix with this team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm in complete agreement with that. I think, like, at this point in time, a year now, we could be having a very different conversation about the mix of like some of the veteran players with the youth and what that looks like. And that will all work itself out, in my opinion. However, I think if you're looking at this point in time, I agree completely with Sandra. I mean, these two players they seem to be playing with a ton of joy. They seem to be wanting to do whatever it takes to play well, be a threat for their team. And then sometimes, whether it's, I appreciate that comment about just scoring penalties doesn't mean much, right? But it actually does, in my opinion. It does when you need to step up. There's an Angel City that haven't won a game. You need to convert. You're playing at home, and you have a huge game opening up the regular season this coming Friday if you're Angel City. It's about momentum at this point in time. If you're not getting into the semifinals, just whatever you can do to build some of that and kind of like feel like you're like turning the ship around a bit, right? And in my opinion, that was the best game that we've seen Angel City. They seemed enthusiastic. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Portland in some ways is depleted, but also is still a pretty good looking Portland team for having missed some players. It wasn't like they just had like scraping to find players off the bench. Like that was not the case at all. We've seen every single one of those players play before. So it's like, and I felt like they seemed dynamic. We saw the midfield look to see if they can control Danny Weatherholt being able to have a little bit more of the ball to be able to showcase her ability to help set some sort of tempo. And, a lot of that has to do with Charlie, in my opinion, being a threat as well. And that that looks very different, right, for them, and alleviate some of the pressure for Kristen Press. But listen, I think if those players are stepping up and converting penalty kicks when it means the most, that means a lot.
It counts. And they're drawing the penalty kicks too in terms of Kristen Press drawing it against OL Reign. Another forward we've got to talk about overseas, playing in the Women's Champions League, Catarina Macario. She plays for Lyon. Lyon played against PSG, and Macario scored a brace in this one. Lori, did you get to watch it?
I did not get to watch it because I was working on my house. And so still in this renovation process, which we're not going to talk about on this podcast. However,
we'll do a home podcast one day.
But I followed. I just haven't watched it. There's one thing though that I saw, I think it was on social media earlier this week, about Macario being the best striker right now for the U.S. Women's National Team. I mean, is that even the conversation? Because I kind of think so. I mean, you could put Pugh in there. Like, don't get me wrong, it could be like, but I think Macario and Pugh hands down are right now. I mean, it's unfortunate that we didn't see Pugh yesterday, but those two for me have been lights out, like the best right now, in form, scoring goals, like just like making it look easy.
They really have.
You know, I did get a chance to take a look at that. Game, and I just what Katarina Macario is doing right now is she's leaving me wordless. You see me, I'm like, eh.
Yeah.
It's just we are witnessing something. We are witnessing the beginning, I think, is what I'm trying to say. We're witnessing the beginning of something very special here, and I'm also like saying that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I think if you're on the American side of this audience, that's not necessarily true. I think if you're on the European side of the audience, maybe that's a little more true. Because I think for those of us in this space, you know, who kind of cover the game, I mean, Lori, I'm sure you can attest to that. I mean, we're following Macario since her days at Stanford, you know, Challenge Cup runs and you know, NCAA fixtures and seeing this player. So in terms of a beginning, we're looking at this player at a collegiate level, but in terms of now being on a very large stage internationally, playing professionally now for club overseas in France with Lyon. For a lot of people, for general casual fans, this is the beginning, I think, for many of them tuning in to a player like Catarina Macario. And I think there's something very special to be said about being able to like be there in the beginnings of things. And I think like there's a number of players where you could kind of say that about, but it's also very few. I think players that come to mind, you think of the greats of the past, like somebody like a Mia Hamm, right? Or more present with somebody like a Mel Pugh, or you know, in this case, we're talking about Catarina Macario. Rose Lavelle, I think I would even include in that category as well, where you're just sort of witnessing the beginnings of something where you know is going to have a very special, you know, ending or continuation. And this has just been an incredible. And it's not even over yet, which is the most wild part for me. But there's just like an incredible Champions League performance. Like there's just an incredible Champions League campaign that Catarina Macario is putting together right now for Lyon, for herself, you know, for I guess, you know, American audiences who are you know, trying to make sure that they're able to view her and the body of work that she's putting together overseas. I'm not too sure how many folks can actually say, oh yeah, I'm able to watch women's French division, you know, league play often and all the time and on the regular, and I'm able to take these games in quite consistently. I think that's maybe a little difficult to do if you're an American fan trying to watch these types of games from a player like Macario. So when you have these Champions League matches a little bit more accessible to much larger audiences, it's going to have more eyes on the product, on the player, and the end result. And she's doing what she's doing with Lyon, and it's like you're watching this player play and do what she's doing, but she's also doing it alongside some other pretty elite players. I mean, you're talking about you've got people who are like already like, yes, future Ballon d'Or winner, you know, et cetera, you know, but you're watching her do this on a pitch with players like Ada Hedgeberg, you know, Marjorie, you know, you're looking, and even on the opposition side of things, when you're going up against a team like PSG and going up against other attacks that has somebody like a Marie Antoinette Katoto, you know, it's it's just impressive, to put it very
It's
simplistically.
making Macario that much better because she's training alongside these players and going into competition with them, that it's so fun to watch. I mean, and seeing her progression as a player from her college days and now into the European and the Champions League and now with the national team, hoping that continues to go and continues to grow